Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to SharePoint IronMan, a session all about going the distance in SharePoint 2010. And by going the distance, I mean being available, being alive, being ready. I'm Mike Watson. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Quest. Done various things. Most relevant to this conversation, I worked at Microsoft for 4 years. Worked on a variety of different problems there, including getting BPOS out the door. BPOS, some of the difficulties we had with BPOS was around availability, trying to design a solution that would be available for our very demanding customers. It's very, very difficult to get a lot of folks to agree to a solution that doesn't have everything you need in it. And SharePoint 2007 was difficult to design when it came to availability. You can find me at these various places. You can see this later and refer to the slides later. So let's get started. So the IronMan 2007, by IronMan, I'm not trying to infringe on the IronMan copyrights and trademarks or whatever. I'm sure there's things and legal ramifications that. But simply saying, there's a race involved, a endurance race, if you will, to keep SharePoint running. And 2007, there was a race in 2007. Thanks to my lovely partner here, Laura. I now have a coffee. I've been up since 4, so this is good. Oh, that's delicious. Nice mocha. SharePoint 2007 was huffing and puffing. It probably ran the IronMan slightly better than I do, or could, because I would probably end up dying, and 2007 keeps going. But there were some difficulties, right? There's a recycle bin. It was, from a content recovery standpoint, it's very, very important for your end users to fix their mistakes. Oops, I deleted that. I shouldn't have deleted that. Oops, I changed that. I shouldn't have changed that. And recycle bin was great. It was much, much better than what we had in 2003, which was exactly zilch. And MSIT had created an interim recycle bin type functionality that worked kind of. Wasn't tested very well, and a lot of you folks used it and deployed it for 2003 because it was better than nothing, because this was a big problem. 2007, recycle bin come along, everything was fine, hunky-dory, except what happens if a user modifies something? I want the old version back. If you're not turning on versioning, which isn't turned on by default, shouldn't be turned on by default, it's a very long, hard process to get that content back. Database mirroring was supported after SP1. Great, but there was a lot of kludgy code involved in getting database mirroring working with SharePoint. You had to have all this crazy configurations, these scripts and stuff to do things in an automated way, which wasn't very good. Disaster recovery. This is like one of the weirdest things ever. You could back up your configuration DB. They wanted you to back up your configuration DB, but you couldn't do anything with it. Restoring it wasn't supported. What was the point? I mean, it wasn't a lot of overhead to back up the DB, but there was really no reason to do it. And anytime you wanted to restore configuration to either the same farm or a different farm, that was a manual process of hopefully you documented everything that was important to you and then made those changes, settings, and stuff on the other side. That process almost never happened properly. Very few people document it, and we're only just now getting tools that allow you to document that stuff without having to do it manually. And there's tens of thousands of settings that you could literally worry about. Most services were redundant, but we have one big glaring problem, the index server. The index server role was not redundant. What was that? Okay. And that was a problem. If you were folks that cared about search availability, you could create redundant query servers, and you propagate your index to the query servers. And as long as the index is either alive and or disappeared from the farm completely, those query servers will continue to serve content. But if you lose that index server and you want to get indexing back, well, first of all, if you lose that index server, you can no longer get new content, obviously. You can't crawl anything new, so you don't see any new updates. So search gets stale. Secondly, when you try to get index back up and running, you take down search for everybody. And until you fix that index and everything gets propagated back out to the front end, to those query servers, searches down. Big, big, big problem. You'd also be in a situation where you might need to crawl from scratch. And depending on the way your environment's configured and how much stuff you're actually crawling and the distance between those crawl sources and things like that, that could be weeks to months process. And again, we have this problem today. So yesterday I gave a presentation here and I presented from this same machine, and every now and then it would just randomly lock up. All it's doing is hosting PowerPoint, so I don't really understand what's going on. If I do this, come back into it, there we go. So, what you asked for. So in 2007 we had a variety of wants and needs, and we decided that we want better granular recovery. Defining granular recovery as restore of individual content, sites, webs, lists, libraries, documents, items. You wanted better disaster recovery and availability. We wanted native support for mirroring. The way they implemented mirroring the way they didn't implement mirroring, the way we implemented mirroring in 2007 wasn't very good. We wanted the native support for mirroring in the box so that SharePoint could better leverage this feature. We didn't want single points of failure anymore. We wanted a configuration backup and restore so we can have robust disaster recovery scenarios. Did SharePoint deliver? How many think so? Show of hands. Wow, you need a lot of skeptics in the audience. I like you guys. So let's talk about granular recovery. Now again, let me define granular recovery. I don't know if is that a common term if people talk about that? Yeah, a few of you know that term. Simply we're talking about the restoration of content. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as end-user restore, content restore. This is simply you supporting end-user needs. Folks have stored stuff in SharePoint. These are your first and best customers, right? And you want to make sure they're happy. And a lot of times they make themselves unhappy by doing stupid things. They delete stuff they shouldn't have deleted. They delete entire sites that didn't need to be deleted, that shouldn't have been deleted. They didn't have, even sometimes shouldn't even have rights to delete. And it starts this whole chain reaction process. It's very, very difficult. Recycle bin came in 2007. It wasn't completely comprehensive. It wasn't versioning. So if you overwrote a file in SharePoint, and Office supported this, if you had the right Office client, you could just do that. If you're working off SharePoint as the source, it would just overwrite as soon as you saved. No versioning to the recycle bin. You could turn on versioning, and that'd be great if you did, but that wasn't default. Because of all this, database restores were still common. Recycle bin didn't grab sites or webs, and so you'd often have to go back to a database to get that stuff. Making a database restore happen is an extremely complex process. I created a workflow when I was working at Tier 2 support for Microsoft. That was my first job as a contractor at Microsoft. And the boss wanted to know why our restores were taking so long, why we had so many unhappy customers. Sometimes it was taking us 2 weeks to tell a customer we couldn't restore their content. It took us 2 weeks to try without being able to do anything about it. And it was because we had this horrible workflow of issues. This was in the 2003 timeframe, just coming up to 2007 timeframe, where we had lots of issues load balancing databases. So we're splitting sites from one database to another. That makes the restore process very, very complex, right? Because now you don't know where the content exists anymore in your backups. You have to go search your backups, request a backup come online, not the right backup, request a new backup come online. And if you're moving around hundreds of gigs at a time, this takes a very, very long time. So it wasn't very good. SharePoint 2010 to the rescue. So we now have this new capability in SharePoint 2010 to recover content from an unattached database. And did I put a slide in here? No. Okay. And so what we're talking about is when you go through that restore process to restore a database to SharePoint, you need to attach that database to a web application to access the content in it. There were a few opportunities to use SQL tools to extract the blobs from the database, if that's what you were after, if you knew how to search for them stuff. Very, very complex stuff. most of us just attached it to a web application, hopefully to a web application in a separate farm for restores and not the real one. But this was a very complex process. So SharePoint 2010 to the rescue. Maybe. Stop that. That's brilliantly fast. Do you like how it paints the screen? That's a feature. Come on. There we go. You Brits and your crazy keyboards. Where is my at? I completely lost. That wasn't it. There we go. Good thing I have the password of password. All right. Okay. I made a huge mistake because for some reason I have a bad build of some beta version of Windows Server 2008, even though Windows Server 2008 has been released forever. And I keep building VMs with it, which is really, really bad. Right. So I'm going to open up Central Administration. No, that's not the new Central Administration. It's got to warm up. So I tried to have a local high availability solution with my laptop. So I bought a laptop server, essentially. Quad core, 8 gigs of RAM, and SSD. And it turns out the SSD was a bad investment because now it's really, really slow. And I got horrible performance. And when I tried to run 2 VMs, everything's fine from a processor memory standpoint, but the hard drive is now a bottleneck. It always was a bottleneck, but it'd be less of a bottleneck if I just had a 7200 RPM drive. Such is life, though. You learn, right? So I'm going to go. So this is the new Central Administration. It's pretty, right? We've organized things a little bit better. We no longer have the application and operations panes. We now they bucketized everything a little bit better, put things in logical places. It's just still odd man out here and there. But we have a backup restore category here. If I click on that, we got a lot of cool new options. I won't focus on the farm backup and restore, but we see we've got granular backup. Performance site collection backup. How many folks do regular site collection backups in your environments? Yeah, a few of you. So this was a good feature add, I guess. Now you can do this directly from Central Administration, whereas you couldn't do that before. I can export a site or a list. I can say export this content, where we used to use STS-ADM for that. You can also do this in PowerShell. Export this content to some file share somewhere and then have that available to import somewhere else. Recover data from an unattached content database is the focus of what we're doing here. So I'm going to click on this. Consume lots of quantity of coffee. Hopefully remember my database name. So what I got here is a page that's asking me for where's the database server. This doesn't have to be your SharePoint database server per se. This could be any SQL server that's hosting the content you want to browse. Opportunistically, it would be great for you to have a separate SQL server for this process because you get into a lot of operational problems if you start restoring would-be production databases to the production server and folks start wondering which one's which. It gets difficult. And it gets really, really troublesome if you start attaching that same database to the farm. Very, very difficult. So I can enter in a database name here, and it's just basically going to allow me to browse. It'd been really nice had they provided a browse button. They didn't. So I'm going to guess at my old content DB name. Something like that. Windows auth, we all use Windows auth, right? Hopefully. Yeah, nobody uses SQL. Right. Operation to perform. Browse content, backup site collection, export site or list. This is rubbish. You don't actually need to pay attention to this because if you just choose browse content, you get all those options later. So just choose browse content. And here we go. So fortunately, I inserted the right name. Else you would have got a nasty little error there. And I get to select the content in this database. Unfortunately, it's not very interesting because all it has is a root site. But that little slash there, that means root. So we're going to choose OK. So that's my root web. And then I have the opportunity here, another tricky little thing that doesn't need to be here, to select a list. And I can select all the lists that are available within this web. By web, I mean site. So I could choose something like large list. There's no reason to do this because I still get the same options if I choose either one. So I can export site or list or backup site collection. Hit next. File location. So here I just simply type in a UNC path. And the Brit keyboard's killing me again. This is SP14-1 slash I'm typing. There it goes. Great. I didn't do it. Right. Ah, come on. All right. Here we go. Okay. So it's running. Operation in progress. We get all this nice timer job status kind of information that you used to get just doing any regular backup. Now if I go to that location, I actually haven't tested this before. I didn't know I could back up to the admin share like that. So I like learning things on the fly, especially in front of lots of people. Oh, I got the right one. And if we browse down, what do we call it? B? There it is. B.back. Beautiful. I guess this is done. Maybe not. Content export, no operation in progress. Oh, it succeeded. That's kind of confusing, isn't it? No operation in progress, okay. Then it was operation in progress. It's like, what's going on? Now, what's interesting is I can't now take this backup and restore it with central administration. I have no GUI option to do any type of restore. What was the point of giving me a GUI option to back up if I can't do a restore? This is great. We still have PowerShell, though. PowerShell is our friend. I didn't mean to click that one. Everybody using PowerShell now? We've all converted now? Yeah, joined the board? Right. If you haven't used PowerShell yet, you want to use SharePoint's little shortcut to PowerShell. I must have clicked on the wrong machine. Else you have to register, which isn't cool. So I'm going to wait for this to come up. Then I'm going to use a very confusing command called import spweb. Right. I'm going to escape out of that because I want to run get help. Brit keyboard again. Yeah, do that. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Get-help import spweb. There we go. Not sure there was so much slowness in that. So description. Import spweb commandlet imports a site collection web application. What is going on? List or library. So essentially import spweb. spweb supports sites, webs, list, libraries. That's confusing. I'm not sure why they did it that way. But it's just one big commandlet to do all your import needs. And it's very, very simple. We simply choose. And the great thing about PowerShell is it'll prompt you for all this stuff. This is supposed to be a demo fest. It's more like a demo flop. Don't you love the life of an administrator? Right. Import spweb. Hit enter. Identity. So it's asking me for where do I want to home this thing. I'm going to choose localhost. There it goes. 36,000, which is my demo server. Root site. And I'll put it underneath here somewhere. Sites test. Then it'll also prompt me, and it gets ready to, for the path of the backup file. This could be the list, CMP, the backup.back, website list library. So I'm going to enter in here sp14-1 /admin, not pound, a dollar. Does that seem anti-cultural to you, Brits, that we have to use dollars and you don't have like a pounds after hidden share? I just realized that. And then b.back, right? And maybe. Cannot find spweb object with ID or URL. Right, okay, let's just give it to the home location. Might need to dial out and dial back in again. It's like I'm going over a 56K modem. Right, so let me enter in. Failed to read package file. Well, this is a beta, and I don't yet have RTM bits. Oh yeah, by the way, I just heard this might be private, but it shouldn't be anyways. MSDN and TechNet will have bits probably Monday, RTM bits. So if you have MSDN or TechNet subscriptions, you'll have bits Monday, which is great. I wish I had them because little problems like this. Well, anyways, you get the point. So I could take any of this content, extract it, and then re-import it, not telling a different farm, the same farm, and find all this stuff here. Moving on. So the verdict on this feature, great, except it only saves me one step of a very complex process, right? Attaching the content database was usually the easiest process once you got all the other stuff done, right? And so while it's great to have this capability, it's really just one part of a very complex process. Also, you don't have the ability to really leverage this feature well, because when you're looking for content to restore, there's a lot of ambiguity associated with that, right? You have to finalize with the user where the content was actually located, and the user doesn't even know, right? And it helps to have a search capability across that. You don't have the ability to automatically restore your DBs. You don't get any prompts to say, maybe you should have a content backup policy that it, involves us creating snapshots of SQL databases on a regular basis. There's nothing like that built into the box. Maybe later on there will be, but for now, there's no really good way to do that. So it's useful. I like it, not perfect. I would say that if you're looking for a better solution, I would look at third-party vendors for that solution. So you also asked for better availability. That meant a couple of things. First, we'll talk about mirroring. The 2007 support for mirroring in SP1 was rubbish. It was just, we figured out a way to make this work so we can make Mike Watson happy and our crazy enterprise customers happy to mirror. And yeah, it works, but they have to figure out all the intricacies of making it work. And it was quite difficult to make mirroring work in SharePoint 2007. It worked fine if no failover happened. Once the failover happened, everything went to hell, right? And it went to hell because SharePoint, well, first of all, SharePoint came out with guidance. This was actually official white paper guidance that they didn't run by anybody. I don't know where they got the guidance from, but it was use the STSADM command rename server to rename your SQL server to the new SQL server. Oh, that sounds brilliant. I'll do that. You do that, SSP no longer works. Excel services stopped working. Search stopped working. Everything stopped working until you renamed it back to the original name. What was happening was that everybody honored that rename server command in WSS. The MOS guys, not so much. And so these MOS applications like Search, SSP, Excel, they didn't really see that happen. And so they were still referring to the old SQL name. So that didn't work very well. You had to have host name tricks. You had to do all this crazy stuff to trick SharePoint into thinking it was talking to one server when it was in fact talking to another server. You could do that with DNS, WINS, even host file tricks. Some folks even went, got as crazy as using hardware load balancers to point to the right SQL server, which is quite interesting. My preferred method was connection aliases. So you use a SQL Server connection alias, which abstracted the name of what SharePoint referred to and simply stripped out the name that SharePoint wanted and replaced it with another name because SharePoint was further up the stack than the SQL connection protocol was. So this was really cool, except it required that you either invent some sort of methodology for updating these things when things failed over, or simply go and manually update it. And if you're looking for high availability, what's the point of having manually updated anything? Because it takes a long, long time to do that, especially in the wee hours of night when somebody gets a page, has to wake up, understand what's going on. 30 minutes later, they might start working on the problem. An hour later, you got it up and running, you just missed your 3 nines. You might even miss your 2 nines that way. You also had database mirroring splits. So what was really interesting about database mirroring is very, very flexible. It's not a cluster. There's not a big group of databases that fell over when one database has something wrong with it. That one database fails over. So imagine your configuration database fails over, everything else stays in the same place. So now SharePoint has no configuration database it can talk to, and because all the databases are over here, you can't just simply change the reference to the other server and expect everything to work. Very, very difficult. I had to create a solution of glue code that simply would recognize the different conditions and states and stuff that SQL could be in, and then try to make decisions. And it's very difficult to make these decisions with code, to figure out which databases to fail over, how to fail over. Very difficult stuff. Uh-oh. There's something wrong with my animations. It's bogging the machine now. There we go. So SharePoint 2010 to the rescue? Maybe. SharePoint 2010 uses the proper methodology for using database mirroring. And that is, it has a failover partner in the connection string to every database connection it uses. Now, since SharePoint now supports 300 databases per web application, and then all those 19 different service applications and as many instances of those you want to create, There's a lot of database connections to worry about. But SharePoint takes care of all this stuff for you behind the scenes. And let's see it in action. Maybe. This is unbelievable. Seem to be completely locked up. I don't think it's interacting. Oh, what's that? Did that work? Maybe not. Let me dial back in. This was just a really cleverly designed coffee break, actually. All right, here we go. Okay. Brit keyboard strikes again. I get confused because some of these take the Brit typing and some don't. And I have to remember where to type. So let me try this. And we're good. Except it's very, very slow again. Well, anyways, while we're standing around and waiting, essentially what we want to do, and what I want to show you, is if I go to application management here, I get a list of web applications. Great. What does web application have to do with database mirroring? If I go into the web applications, I can see all my content databases for each web application. And then within within central administration, I can update the partner connection. So by partner, I mean the other SQL instance that we want to mirror to. So in this way, I say, SharePoint, here's your main SQL instance, but here's your failover partner. And this guy could host the database as well. And if you can't find a database over here, if you get a status message that says this database has failed over from SQL, and or you cannot contact SQL after a default time of 10 seconds, go ahead and try to connect to the database over on the other side. So in this way, it's a very, very fast failover solution. And maybe, right, not working at all. Let me close this thing down. It is responding, just being super slow. Anyways, moving swiftly on. So, the verdict is awesome. I like SharePoint 2010's database mirroring implementation. Let me tell you some of the rubs. First of all, they do not do any work for you on the back end. If you want to mirror, if you want to use database mirroring, you have to configure all the back end stuff yourself, which really sucks. That's a lot of work. It's very, very difficult. Microsoft's smart. They could have figured that out and put it all in the wizard for you and done all the hard stuff for you. They didn't do it. They didn't have time. This is the best we could get. I'll take it. It's better than what we had. database mirroring it's a good solution. It's a great solution as a replacement. We talked about this a little bit yesterday in my storage discussion. It's a good solution if you got two problems. One problem being you need a very, very fast failover solution between two geographically dispersed but very, very close locations as a replacement, say, for geo-clustering, which is not supported in SharePoint, except under very, very select situations. It is very, very difficult to support any type of latency in that situation. So if you want to have, say, more than 5 milliseconds of latency between two locations, which is probably default for most data centers within 5 miles apart of each other, it's very, very difficult to allow that solution to be supported. Now, what I've heard is that if you call up support, if you have a premier agreement or one of these awesome service agreements with Microsoft, you come in and have Microsoft bless your environment, and they'll allow you to get away with longer distances. And I've heard up to 5, 10 milliseconds in distance. It becomes more problematic as you get further and further away from each other, because what you're using here is synchronous mirroring. What synchronous mirroring is, and I don't have any type of diagrams and stuff to explain this to you, however, what synchronous mirroring is when SharePoint talks to a database, when it tries to update, insert, update, delete data from a database, before it can do it against the principal database, that database that's online that it uses, it must do that operation on the mirror database first. That's how they guarantee consistency between the two. And this is the only option supported in SharePoint for database mirroring, is this synchronous option. Because of that overhead associated with updating the mirror before I update the principal, that could be a very slow process. And as you add latency to the mix, things get very, very, very slow. So it's important to keep that in mind. However, the other option I like with database mirroring is that how many of you have SANs and shared storage? Just about the entire room. How many of you like your storage vendor? I couldn't even scripted that any better. Your storage vendor costs you a lot of money, and often not very. Are there any storage vendors in here before I slag all you guys off? Sorry about that, sir. If you have a very, very spendy storage solution, there's great reasons for those solutions. I still like SAN. SAN's a very enterprise-centric solution. However, if you're looking for a low-cost storage option, database mirroring might give you an answer. Because if you have to have high availability and low cost, you really have to have either a very, very cheap SAN solution, and by cheap SAN solution, I mean probably a SAN solution doesn't have many features, may not meet your enterprise SAN hosting team's needs, doesn't have the connectivity options you want. Essentially, we're talking probably like iSCSI options here, things like that. Not very robust solutions. With database mirroring, you get the opportunity to have very, very cheap direct attached storage. So you have a direct attached storage on SQL Instance 1, direct attached storage on SQL Instance 2. With the new options in direct attached storage, you get very, very fast storage. You use the SAS stuff that we used at Microsoft, 3 gigabyte plus connectivity between you and the storage array. And even though you have to buy double the storage, so if you had 30 terabytes over here, you need 30 terabytes over here to mirror that, right? But because you're buying cheap storage, because you're buying SAN-less storage, it's actually much, much cheaper than your enterprise SAN solutions. So I love it for that, and that's why we implemented it at Microsoft. Not so much for availability, we implemented it to save money. So really, really cool. You asked for no single points of failure. Let's talk about that a bit. In 2007, you couldn't make search redundant. There was no way to, what was that? I'm seeing things. Anyways, there was no way for search to be redundant. And by that, I mean you have redundant query servers, and they'll serve out users. If you lose a query server, it automatically fails over. It's got its own internal load balancing and failover mechanisms. So your end users don't really see much until certain things happen. First off, your index server goes down, and this happened a lot for some reason in SharePoint. Index server goes down, search results start getting stale. And if you work for those business units that have business processes built into search functionality, that can be problematic, right? If they're getting, every 5 minutes, they're getting search alerts on something that's changed in the search index and it's part of their business process, that can be very problematic. Second of all, when you want to restore search, bring search out, okay, I figured out search is down, my users are mad, let's fix it and bring it back up. The process of fixing search broke search for everybody. So queries went down, query servers are no longer functional, search is offline, you get horrible error messages, and long story short, maybe 4 days later you get search up and running with a minimal set of results. And it's because you had to rebuild search index and start all over again. Search works, but it doesn't work because it has no results. And if you're one of those folks that have lots of things going on in search, you have lots of content sources, you have very robust needs around what you search in your environment, and it's more than just SharePoint. Maybe you're searching file shares and application stores and things like that. Depending on the latencies between you and that source, it could take a very, very, very long time to re-index that content. Microsoft had, I think at last check, they had 45 million items in their search. It's constantly growing. And in SharePoint 2007, if they wanted to recrawl everything, which they've had to do a few times because of these search problems, it would take them 8 weeks plus to recrawl everything. Never mind the fact that they have business owners, business units that are highly reliant on that search working to enable their business processes. So, not a good option. And here we go again. It should just expect it by default now. Right. So enter the SharePoint 2010 search topology. So now we have a, well, first of all, the roles are slightly different. They're all the same roles, but they all have different names now. We have a crawl component, which is the index. That's what I was just talking about. We have a crawl database now. It used to be called search database. Simple as that. We have an index partition and query component. This means the query. And we have a property database now, what used to be known as SSP database. SSP did a lot of different things, including storing search properties. So all this different stuff has changed. Oop. What it really means, I love this slide. I borrowed this from Joel Olson. I hope he doesn't mind. He's usually pretty cool. Is that I can have very, very robust topologies now. I can have topologies to scale to meet my needs for any variety of search situations. Search will scale beyond 50 million items. Here's a news flash. Search didn't scale in 2007 to the quoted limit of 50 million items at all. But 2010 looks like it might actually scale much, much, much further, way past what people originally envisioned, past most people's needs, because now I can have redundant and or scaled out search indexing, search query components. I can essentially scale search, make search redundant wherever I need it redundant, wherever I need it scaled, which is really, really cool. So I can have very, very large topologies of just search. Let's see it, if I can get this demo working. SB14-2. I think there's a slight delay in when I click and when things happen. Nope, my mouse changed. There we go. It's looking more responsive now. what I'm trying to do is get to central administration here and go to application management, and then I want to manage service applications. Search, like all services in SharePoint 2010, is a service application. And yesterday I talked about the benefits of the service application infrastructure, how it's improved the capabilities for scalability and or performance and or high availability in our case here today. It also gives the capabilities for individual tenants of service applications. And by tenants, I mean folks who have built on the service application infrastructure, i.e. search, i.e. managed metadata service, i.e. custom vendor solution here. These folks get to, even though they subscribe to a framework, they get to do a few additional things, such as figure out how their topology will be, how they leverage different servers in the farm, how many databases they'll have, and whether or not they'll support database mirroring. All the SharePoint 2010 stuff out of the box supports database mirroring. So in addition to having redundant capabilities to create different components, I have the ability to now mirror my search databases as well and my other application databases. And this demo is turning out to be problematic. It's like the VM's responding, but none of the UI is responding. No, not working. All right. So much for a demo fest. So anyways, the verdict on this feature, even though you can't really see it, is that it's awesome and no buts. It's a really good solution because that was a very big problem for you folks that had the high scale needs around search. Now we don't have this problem anymore. Actually, the infrastructure supports whatever your wildest search dreams are can come true with this new infrastructure, so it's great. Right. So moving on to configuration backup and restore. So 2007, we already talked about, allow you to back up your configuration database. Why? Couldn't restore it. Was it supposed to be a reference? You're not supposed to query databases anyways. You're just supposed to query the database, understand what your properties were. You go in, you select star from sys or from objects and pull back all these different classes, join class ID, figure out what's going on. Here's my web application. Oh, here's the inner XML that defines my web application. Great. What do I do with that? That's no fun. You couldn't restore it. What was really interesting is there's some vendors out there, some of which you're probably using right now, who support configuration database restore, where they support restoring your configuration. And they support that restore by restoring your configuration database, which Microsoft does not support. So it's quite interesting that you're now using an unsupported solution. And if you ever did have to make that decision, go or no go, are we going to restore this configuration or start from scratch? And you say, yeah, let's just use the easy button the vendor gave us. Now you're possibly in an unsupported state. And being in an unsupported state could be highly problematic for you from a Microsoft perspective. Now, if you want support from the vendor is supposed to take liability now. Since you've done that and you push that easy button, the vendor is supposed to take liability for your support. And they'll help you, but they'll never be as good as Microsoft. Not that Microsoft's any good at support. There are thousands of configuration settings, thousands, tens of thousands, that could possibly affect your farm and things you care about, and they're very hard to mirror. So I came up with this really, really cool solution at BPAWS, which promptly got rejected for one reason. I had a farm over here in this region, had a farm over here in this region, and we'd have log shipping, sending content databases across, shipping all the changes to the content databases. Everything was great, except there was a massive amount of configuration changes we made to each farm on a regular basis, and now they would have to, since we had farm 1 and farm 2, they would have to make those same configuration changes to the other farm. Since we're very realistic at Microsoft about our capability to do that, we decided it wasn't a very good option because we know that that would not happen and that things would get out of sync because there was no reason really to make the DR farm look like the production farm because it didn't stop me from doing my regular day job, and there was only a 0.0001% chance of ever having to use that DR farm. And most settings are somewhat innocuous in that you can bring up a DR farm, attach some content to it, and as long as the customizations, all the assemblies and stuff that you reference in that farm are installed and properly referenced, your content renders. Users are happy. But then some things can be very problematic. Like, default out of the box, you get 50 meg file upload limit. And if users start using that DR farm and they're used to uploading 100 meg files or 200 meg files, suddenly it doesn't work. That's just one example of meeting where that could be a problem. The bottom line is it made DR scenarios such as warm code site, like I just described, very, very difficult. So in 2010, they've added the ability to back up and restore the configuration. What's interesting about this is that, at Quest Software, I built a tool called Server Administrator that we're releasing now to beta, which simply goes through the object model, recurses all the different administration settings and stuff we care about, and brings it back to a console, to a database, so that we can do interesting stuff with it, like report on configuration problems, things like that. It was interesting that after I started creating this solution to look at Microsoft's configuration backup, which is simply a similar thing. What they did was they went to their object model, wrote out all the settings, reflected all the settings and stuff into an XML file. And you can go view these XML files and go look at your configuration settings. And it's actually more intuitive than going to the configuration database and querying it. You can go in and see how your web applications and stuff, see all these different properties and stuff, and use that information to refer to configure other environments or for your own reference. That's really cool. Now we're supposed to do a demo. I have a feeling that the demo is probably not going to work. It seems to be stuck here. I can try it from this server. However, I do know from experience that this server will not probably render central administration for us. Sounds like the next room is finishing. We were slightly behind schedule. That's a good sign. Great. Okay. Not going to work there. Anyways, I think we're running out of time. Well, essentially, what you get is the capability to back up all those different settings to this XML location. It's no different than like what you saw with the site export. You back it up to a UNC path. You can then use that UNC path referred to in a future basis. So if you're familiar with backing up a farm in SharePoint 2007 from central administration, you would go and do that same process in this situation with one exception. You would select all the different farm components, and keep in mind there are many, many farm components now in SharePoint 2010 because of all the different service apps and stuff. Select all that stuff. Select the one big tree node that says select everything. Then you go next. When you go next, you get the option to back up content and configuration or just configuration. So if you select the configuration option, all you get is just a big group of XML files. These XML files don't have any proper headings or names or anything to tell you about what they refer to, but in a roundabout way, you can go and look and refer to things and figure out what things are. So you can find a file for your web applications. You can find your file for your farm object and things like that. You can then take that information and restore it to the same farm and or a different farm. I have not tested to restore it to a different farm. I don't know if that works well. I can imagine a number of problems, just like you always had if you tried to apply configuration of one farm to another farm. Server names change. Environmental variables change. IPs change. Things like this. Host name changes. Active Directory changes. Things change, so it could be potentially problematic. I don't know if I would trust it in that situation. Pull up this slide. I'm not sure I would trust a restore in that scenario, and I might still want to, I'll say for my own use, I will continue to test this and see if it is something that can be reliable and useful. If not, it'll probably be the same old story as usual. Please keep doing what you do to protect your configuration, which frankly for most people is nothing. And it might be okay. We're still talking about things that matter on a 0.0001% chance of something happening. That said, nobody thought we'd be stuck here in the UK because of some volcano in Iceland. You can't fly out, right? Things happen. And if you watch some crazy movies of late, you'll know that things will start happening very soon on a very rapid basis. But SharePoint might be the least of your concerns. This configuration XML we already talked about, it's very useful for reference. You can take that information. Maybe somebody will come up with a cool solution that will reflect this information and put it in some sort of usable GUI format. Third-party solutions can probably then also leverage this information for their own disaster recovery solutions. Maybe the third-party vendor will come along and say, hey, I want to do disaster recovery right. I want to give people the configuration options so that they can make one farm look like another farm via supported API methods and not none of this crazy stateful configuration backup that gets problematic. So putting it all together, and we're running out of time, these slides existed in 2007, but when I talked about these slides in 2007, I mentioned lots of kludginess. I mentioned lots of glue code and stuff to kind of make these scenarios happen. Now, with the SharePoint 2010 features, solutions like this become very simple. Now, in this scenario, I have a primary facility and secondary facility that are relatively close together, maybe within 10 miles or so. 10 miles will protect you from most natural disasters. 10 miles does not protect you from large regional events. It won't protect you from volcano problems, probably. It won't protect you from earthquake problems, probably. It might protect you from localized flooding. It might protect you from tornadoes. I know that you guys don't really care about that stuff here, but it's a major problem in the U.S., especially in the Midwest, especially for folks like Dell, HP. In this solution, we have a load balancer. He doesn't actually sit in the middle of some no man's land. He sits in either location and or both locations, and he directs traffic either via DNS or something to your web front ends. Those web front ends, in turn, talk to the SQL Principal server, which is on one side of the fence. And because you have LAN-like conditions between these two data centers, and by LAN-like I mean probably gigabit connectivity, and 2 milliseconds RTT, which is the official supported number, which we already talked about might be gamed in some ways with support. Because you have those solutions, it's almost like the farm is local. So with this solution, once again we lock up. There we go. Doesn't like my animations. And what happens here is that now SQL is going to take that transaction, replicate it to your mirror server, which is offline, however, standing by for the inevitable. The inevitable will come. This database will go down at some point. SharePoint will detect this. Oh, we haven't talked about SQL Witness Server today, but SQL Witness Server is a way to automate the failover between your SQL servers. Witness Server is useful if you want an automatic solution. If you don't want an automatic solution, which can be problematic, however, SharePoint 2010 made the Witness Server much more relevant because it now automatically handles this stuff for us. The Witness Server can be useful. So the Witness Server will decide to fail over these two databases and bring this guy out of retirement into the major leagues here, and this guy goes back in retirement, and now we have the SQL Principal Server living in the secondary facility. And now SharePoint will happily talk to the SQL Principal Server. It's a really good solution. Now, what happens if we want to get back? If this facility goes on fire, something happens to this guy, he starts burning down, we now have the capability to bring this instance online. No questions asked. Everybody's happy. Piece of cake, right? We also have a disaster recovery solution. So I'd call that somewhere between high availability and disaster recovery. It's mostly a high availability solution, and you can implement that same solution without two data centers. Maybe you have one data center. Most data centers are gigantic, right? You can have it on one side of the data center, north side, and then the south side, and have the two solutions mirror between the two. That's better than sticking them all in the same rack, right? You don't want all the stuff in the same rack. That's a big deal. Great for latency, great for performance, bad for redundancy. If you have more robust needs, i.e., needs to have geographic replication between distances farther than 10 miles apart, you need to look at a secondary solution. And this is a solution where that configuration backup and restore could be very interesting, because SharePoint has always supported geographic replication of content. I can use whatever method will get content from point A to point B, including snail mail. We had a joke at Microsoft, Mark bytes per second, which was how fast a guy named Mark could fly to a location with tapes in his hand, put the tapes in the server, and upload those bits to the server, restore everything, and then come back. It was Mark bytes per second. In high latency situations like geographical continental divides, things like that, Mark bytes per second were much faster than any of the latencies we could get from large vendors. So you can use whatever replication solution, database mirroring, not the synchronous stuff, but the asynchronous stuff, the high performance stuff. Doesn't guarantee consistency, but it guarantees performance. You can use log shipping. You can use robocopy. Any method you want to get the content across these two different environments to this separate farm. Now, over here in the secondary facility, it is a second standalone farm. It knows nothing about this farm up here. And it's up to you to replicate the configuration stuff that matters, i.e. server customizations, your application settings, things like that, must be replicated to this web app server for this stuff to work. So that's our replication going. When all hell breaks loose, you attach this content to the farm, everything works hunky-dory. So it's great. The point I want to make with this is that this configuration backup and restore may or may not facilitate this. It may or may not be a good solution for this. If it isn't in SharePoint 2010, we still have the old method, which is just make it happen. Boots on the ground, right? There's all kind of text down here you can't see. I can't see it either. Right. So you do have the capability to fail back too. Most people don't want to live in the secondary facility because the secondary facility is probably really far away from the main bulk of your clients. So you can fail back depending on a variety of things. So in summary, SharePoint 2010 offers many improvements over 2007, leading to better availability, better, faster content recovery, possibly better disaster preparedness, and as a result, happier end users and happier, easier administration, right? Bottom line is everybody wins. I think we're over time. Again, you can refer to these locations. This is where I live. You can see all my latest ramblings. Don't have time for Q&A, but you can come up afterwards, ask me any questions, and I'll be happy to answer. Thanks again.